Hello friends! This tutorial is the continuation of the complete tutorial for intermediates that I have published before in this channel. Now in this video, I'm going to focus on the status bar, and then I will explore more the topics dimension lines, lines and polylines and other drawing commands, and tips for texts. Let's start. In this first chapter, I'm going to focus on some functions of the status bar that I haven't explained before in the previous tutorials. I will start with the isometric drafting, and to understand how it works, we are going to draw this simple cube which is represented as a 2D isometric projection. There are three different planes that we can work on: the left, right and top. And before starting, let's switch on the grid, and you can notice when I turn on the isometric drafting for the left plane, the cursor and the grid are automatically readjusted. And the same happens with the snap mode and the ortho mode. However, the polar tracking doesn't work for isometric drafting, and that means you should be in the ortho mode to use this technique properly. Okay, let's make the cube. I start with the left plane, and this time I'm going to switch on both the grid and the snap modes, even they are not required, to help you visualizing the drawing process. I'm going to start in a major intersection and then make the edges, each of them measuring 200 millimeters. So, when I'm done with this face, I change the plane to right, and you can see how easily it's now to draw the right side. This time I switch off the snap mode because I don't need it anymore. And finally, I turn on the top plane to draw the remaining edges. Now you can start practicing iso drafting in your projects. Annotative scaling. Now, in this drawing I have added annotative dimensions in different scales, 1 per 50, 1 per 10 and 1 per 2, so they appear in the viewport that has exactly the same scale. As at this moment the annotative scale is 1 per 1, no dimension lines are shown here. However, if I activate this button, all the dimension objects appear now in the workspace. Basically, when this icon is off, I can only see the annotation objects that match the current scale. The next icon adds scales to annotative objects when the annotation scale changes. Has the following effect. If I change this scale, each dimension line was added to that scale, and they will still appear if I change one of the viewports to the scale of 1 per 5. The gear here that looks like a settings menu is actually meant for switching the workspace. By default, Autocad comes with 3. The current one is drafting and annotation, which is used for drawing in 2D. Then we have 2 workspaces for 3D modeling. First, we have 3D Basics. This one comes with simple commands in the panels for drawing 3D objects. And as you can notice, the buttons here are bigger than in the other panels. Finally, we have 3D Modeling, and here the panels and menus are more complex, with plenty of commands to model our projects. Then, if we are not happy with none of these workspaces, we can create a new one in Save Current As, and then customize it here in this option. Finally, if we put a tick here, we can display the workspace name in the status bar. This button, which represents a square, a circle and triangle, is for isolating or hiding objects, and it's very simple to use. Let's start with isolate. Then I pick these two objects, press enter, and as you can notice, everything is hidden without this part. On the other hand, if I click on hide, I can hide some objects from the screen, and I'm doing it on these three ones as an example. To return to the normal state, I click on End Object Isolation and everything is shown again. Hide and isolate can be especially useful when in a complex project I want, for example, to make some changes in this specific section. Here, I have decided to isolate this part and then hide the lines that I don't need. One last tip. Alternatively, I can access these options from the right-click menu, and it's exactly the same as what you can find on the status bar. The next icon is the Autodesk Trust DWG. This function analyzes if the current DWG file was last saved with an Autodesk product or by a software developer licensed to use the real Autodesk toolkit. If it matches this criteria, you will have a green tick here. If not, you'll get a warning instead of the tick, and Autodesk cannot guarantee the application compatibility or integrity of the file. In other words, if you were working in a DWG file in a different CAD software, it may work properly here in Autocad, but it's not 100% guaranteed. The next button is called Clean Screen, and we just use it to switch to the full screen mode, like this. This can be useful if we want to work in a wider workspace. So, click on it again to get to the previous state. Finally, we have customization. Here we can add or remove icons to the status bar as we wish. Some of those used to be included in the status bar by default in previous versions, and that was the case of the dynamic input. I'm going to check this option, and you can see it appearing just before the ortho mode. Also, have in mind that the tick doesn't mean the function is turned on, only that it's displayed in the status bar. So, this function shows the input next to the cursor when I type anything with the keyboard, such as a command name, length, etc. And look that it's not showing it anymore when it's off. Another function you can add to the status bar is the selection cycling, and this one is very useful for complex projects. Let's switch it on. And basically, when I click on two objects at the same time, I mean when they are overlapped, this window shows up so I can select the object that I want. By default, it selects the one in the front, and in this case is the construction line. But if I want the line that's on the back, I simply click here and it's selected. Now this is important. If you zoom out a lot and click in a place where it's busy with objects, for example here, look that the window shows up a big list that you can choose from. In this case, most of these objects are not necessarily overlapped, but they are close enough, so they still appear in the list. Okay, in this chapter, I will explain some extra tools for the dimension lines. Let's start. Continue and baseline. On the next example, suppose I want to add more dimension lines to measure the remaining distances along this side. Instead of creating dimensions one by one, there is a very useful tool that can save you considerable time if you are working on a huge project. The continue dimension. First, I'm going to draw a vertical dimension here. Then, I'm going to push this button that says continue. And suddenly, it looks like I'm making another dimension in the same direction as the last one that I created here. So, as you can see, it's easy to place several dimensions, by just clicking on the points that we want. When you finish, just press Escape. I also want to explain you a tip. As this command defaults to continue the last dimension, I need to click on Select to change to a different dimension line. For example, I click in this one if I want to continue it to the right, for example. Below the button Continue, we can find the baseline. With this feature, we can make several dimension lines measuring a distance from the same point. Also, look that the procediment is the same as for the Continue command. However, there is a specification that's a bit different. The spacing between each line must be defined on the Dimension Style Manager. I'm going to modify the current style, Internal Measures, and on the line section, we can change the baseline spacing. Let's increase it a little bit to 5. And then click on OK. OK, nothing has changed here. In fact, the new spacing only applies for the next dimensions that I will draw. I'm going to delete them and repeat baseline again, and look that the spacing is a bit wider than before. Another tip regarding baselines is about the position of the dimension. It's curious that if the pointer is below the line and the text, the new dimension will stay above it. And if I move the cursor to the other side, you can see that I'm switching the position of this new dimension line. Have a look at this example where you can see some dimension lines intersecting each other. In order to avoid them appearing as normal lines, we can add dimension breaks at their intersections. The icon is this one, and the way this works is really simple. I just need to click on a dimension line, press Enter, and the break is added automatically at each intersection. Now let's activate the command again. Another way to access it is by typing dim break. And this time I select the dimension 600, and as you can see I broke it at these two dimension lines, but stays continuous at this point, because a break is already added in the previous dimension. Also, breaks apply to any kind of objects that the dimension line intersects. And to show you this, I'm going to repeat the command in this drawing where this dimension line intersects those circles. Look, there is a break in all the intersections. To edit the break size, I just need to go to the Dimension Style Manager, modify the style Dims for exercises, the current one, go to the tab Symbols and Arrows, and at the bottom you can see the section for the dimension break where I can change the break size. As an example, I'm going to set 10, click on OK, and now as you can see the gap has increased. Dimension space. At the right of the icon Dim Break, we can find Dim Space. When the dimensions are not well organized, or we just want to set the same spacing between different levels, we can use this command. The process is the following. First, I need to choose the base dimension, which is the one that will not move. Then I pick the dimension to space. Let's select this one with 200 mm of length. Press Enter, and then I can type a value or set an automatic spacing. If I press Enter again, you can see the second dimension goes down, and now the spacing between both matches the extension lines of the first dimension. Okay, now I'm going to undo this pressing Ctrl Z and repeat the command again. I select the same base dimension, but this time I pick up these two. I use again the auto spacing, and now the three levels are separated equally. Let's go back one last time. I'm going to do exactly the same, but now instead of automatic, let's type a specific distance. For reference, I can look at that small dimension of 20 mm, So let's put the spacing a bit wider. I think 30 is fine. Now this is how it looks like. Create a jog dimension. This new example has a section at the right which is long enough to not fit in a paper. And this representation means that this length is larger than what it looks like here. So I'm going to add a dimension line, but this time let's use the tool Continue. Then pick up this last dimension and place this new one here. Now the length of this dimension line is 300 mm. However, the real size of that section is 1500. To represent that, I need to add a jog dimension. The button is located here. And this is simple. First I click on the button, then select the dimension line and click exactly in the place where you want to add the jog. Now to replace the current measurement, I can simply double-click on the text and change the value to 1500. Basically, what I'm doing here is adding a text override, and it can be either as a text, numbers, or both. Finally, select the dimension, click with the right button, go to Quick Properties, and there I can see the real measurement of the dimension, which I cannot change it, is 300, and the current text override. Now, to display the real dimension length again, you can just erase the text override. It's also possible to edit the size of the jog in the Dimension Style Manager. I'm going to modify the current style. In the Symbols and Arrows tab, there is a panel called Linear Jog Dimension. Here, we have to specify a height factor with the text size. As it's currently set as 1.5, you can see the size of the jog a bit bigger than the text. And if I change it to 3, click on OK and close the windows, you can see now the jog increased to 3 times the size of the text. Okay, now let's have a look at extra tips to apply to dimension lines. Draw the dimension line at a specific distance from the object. Suppose we have this example and we need to add dimensions to indicate the lengths of these lines. In fact, that's easy to do. We just need to activate the command Dimension Linear, click on 2 points, and finally click again to place the dimension line, right? Okay, now I'm going to do the same, but for the left side. And also let's add a horizontal dimension here in the bottom. As you can see, the dimensions are correct, and there is nothing wrong with them. But as you can notice, I used a random distance from the lines for each of the dimensions. Okay, maybe it's not a big deal, but in my opinion, it's better if we use a specific dimension spacing for the entire drawing, or even for the full project. Let's see. I'm going to do this again. This time, I'm drawing a dimension line measuring this section. But then, instead of clicking on a random location for placing the measurement, I decided to have it, for example, at 500 mm above the line. And when I see this extension track line, I type 500 and press Enter. In this way, I will have that distance between both objects. Then, for the left dimension, I use the same method. I hover the endpoint, drag to the left and type 500 again. Finally, I repeat the same process down here. Type the 500 mm. And now you can see that all the dimensions have the same separation between the lines, making the drawing looking nicer. Of course, there are always exceptions in a rule. Let's use the command Continue for the dimensions above. First, I have to choose to select the object that I want to continue. I click on Select, then on this extension line, As you can see, I am adding another dimension connected with the first one. And finally, add a third dimension by clicking in this last corner. Of course, as you can see, this last dimension is far away from the line. But in this way, I can have all the dimensions in this side all along the same reference line. Finally, here you have an example of this method applied in a floor plan. Set specific lengths for extension lines. Another nice setting is to set a fixed length for the extension lines, those bars that limit the measurement. Using the default settings, when I add more dimension lines all along this side, and look that I can do it pretty quick by just clicking in each intersection, they start from the points where I click with an offset gap that is also specified in the Dimension Style Manager. I'm going to access that menu by clicking on the icon located on the Dimensions panel. Select the dimension style, this one Annotative, and click on Modify. In this section below, put a tick here to add a fixed length on all the extension lines. As you can see, the length here is 3 mm, and actually, as this is an annotative style, this value means that the extension lines will measure 3 mm in a paper after printing it. Click on OK, and you can see the result. Use template files with your own dimension styles. This is a good practice if we want to keep the dimensions with the same appearance in all the projects we are working on. Suppose you have a file about the project of the building X, then your next one will be about the building Y, and then the building Z. As you will probably use different DWG files for each project, to keep the same dimension styles, the best is to have a template and use it whenever you start a new project. So, in a new file, which can be from a template you have created, and I don't have any objects here in the workspace, I'm going to the Dimensions tab on the Annotative menu and click on Manage Dimension Styles. So these are the default styles. I can modify any of them or create a new style if I want. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. I click on New. Then, on the first blank, I should write a name for the new style. Start with means that I copy the settings of the style that is showing here. In this case, Annotative. Below, I decide if I want to use annotative dimensions by checking this box. And finally, I can continue. So now we can make the changes that we need. Text, arrows, primary units, etc. I'm going to add just a suffix here as the symbol of millimeters, because I put it on the title. And click on OK to save the changes. After, I can add more styles. For example, let's say I am creating a similar style with the same settings, except for the suffix I'm going to set meters. And for that I put a scale factor to convert millimeters to meters. Of course, this is in case I'm making the drawing in millimeters. And when you are ready with your styles, let's save this file as a template. Choose the name and save it on the default templates folder or create a new one. In this way you can start your projects with the same template and you don't need to edit the dimension styles again. On the next chapter of this video, we will go back to lines and polylines, but this time we are going to learn some interesting tips that will help you to master these two commands. Let's start with settings to edit in a polyline. There are several features we can edit in a polyline, and we are going to start with close. To explain you this situation, I'm going to use this example where we are going to draw this simple figure with the command polyline. You will see that what matters here is the way we will draw the last line. Let's activate the command polyline. As you may know, I can click on the icon at the ribbon, or a faster way is using its alias. Just type PL and press Enter. Then I'm going to draw this irregular polygon, and let's make it beautifully, starting at the same horizontal plane. First, make sure Object Snap and Ortho Mode are on. The snaps are off. Let's turn them on. I'm going to hover this endpoint, drag to the right following this track line, and then I type 200 mm to start a polyline at that distance from the corner. Then I draw each line by typing the exact length with the keyboard. And to make the things easier for you, you can just look at the left drawing as all the dimension lines are there. Also, notice as we are in ortho mode, all the lines snap vertically or horizontally, and in this way we can draw all the lines much faster. I'm going to speed up the process, and when I arrive at the last line, I'm going to finish the polyline normally by clicking at the endpoint. What happens is, if I'm using the grips to modify the figure, by trying to move the line at the bottom a bit down, where we should click on this grip at the middle, you can see it separates from the last line. In contrast, what happens if I try to do the same in these other segments? Look. However, let's go back. When we want to join the last line with the start point, we can click on Close or typing CL, and this time I basically remove any start and last point from the polyline, and the lines no longer break at the origin. Now I'm going to select the polyline and right-click with the mouse. Let's go towards Polyline, and there are several settings that we can do here. If I click on Open, look what has happened. The last segment that I inserted just disappeared, leaving the polyline open. Instead, if I click on Close, I get back to a closed polyline exactly how it was before. With the options at the bottom, I basically convert a polyline into a spline. If I choose Curve Fit, you get this result, and it's exactly like drawing this figure using the Spline Fit command. On the other hand, if I convert a polyline to Spline Fit, it uses the method of drawing the Spline CV command. I know it sounds a bit counterintuitive, but CV actually means control vertices. In the same menu related with the polylines, we can add a width in case we want to represent that polyline a bit thicker comparing with the other objects in this drawing. Then we are prompted to insert a value. Because I have these dimensions here as a reference, I can guess more or less how the new thickness will look like. Let's insert 10, and it should be more or less this distance. Type 10, press Enter, and here you have the result. One characteristic when you add a width to a polyline is when you select it, the grips are located at an imaginary line in the middle. To get back to the previous state, I go again to width, but this time I'm going to type 0 to disable this property. Convert lines in a single polyline. Sometimes we are just drawing something, and only after finishing we realize that we have been using the command line instead of polyline. That's fine, and there is no need to draw everything again, of course. There is a command for that, the command join. You can find it here on the Modify panel. That's simple. Select all the objects and they convert to a single polyline. Line types. A lot of AutoCAD users have encountered problems when dealing with line types. In addition, the way they appear in the workspace can be very different than in viewports on the layout tabs. All that scrolling is due to the line type scale. So, in this tutorial we are going to explore this step by step, hoping this won't be a big issue for you. Back on the same drawing, we are going to create a new layer here. Let's name it Dash Lines. And set a different color. for example this light blue one. Next, I select the drawing at the right and change it to the new layer. On the Layer Properties Manager, there is a column about line types. Let's change the line type for this layer. And first I have to load a new one. And as you can see, there are lots of them that AutoCAD provides by default. I select this ISO-space. Then don't forget to select it also here, click on OK and close. As you can see, the lines in that blue layer are now dashed. Now, there isn't any control to set a measure of each dash or to set the quantity of dashes within a line. That would be very hard to measure, but what we can do instead is set the line type scale. Now, in AutoCAD, we can set a line type scale for a specific object, or we can apply it generally for all the file, and in that case, all the lines that are not continue change their appearance. So, to set the general line type scale, I type LT scale and press enter. The default value, as you can see, is 1, and this drawing has the dashes with this size. If I change the scale to 0.5, you can see the dash sizes are now half smaller. If I am not happy with the result, I can keep changing until I find the size that works for me. So, at this moment it doesn't look hard, but suppose now I draw a line very large in comparison with the existing objects. What happens here is, with the same line type scale, I cannot see anything. As I don't want to modify the other dash lines, I can do a different process. Select the line and go to Properties. And here you can see a setting for the line type scale. By changing this value, and this time I'm going to try a very huge one, for example 50, and let's see. Finally, I can see the dashes properly without changing the lines that I have in the exercise that I showed you before. Now let's go back. But they seem to change. Okay, this is actually just a problem of loading the screen. Usually if you zoom the screen few times, we'll solve this problem. But in this kind of situations, the best is to use the command regen. Regenerate. And now the dashes are visible again. Object snap overrides. Midpoint between 2 points. Imagine we are drawing a polyline or a line. Here, the next point will be on the midpoint of this distance. Normally, we would make a temporary line there and use its midpoint. That's a way. However, there is an alternative. If I right-click, go to Object Snap Overrides, select Mid between 2 points, then you will see, if I click on 2 points, the line ends at the middle between them. Use the specific Object Snap mode. Sometimes you have probably noticed it's hard to find the mode we actually want, especially if a lot of them are turned on. For that, we can go to Snap Overrides and choose the one we want to use right now. For example, if I select perpendicular, it's very easy to find a perpendicular intersection to this line. Okay, let's go on. Now I am going to show you extra drawing commands that you can find in this little section. Let's start with spline. It's a command to create a smooth curve. And there are two types. The first one is spline fit. Here we choose the points where the curve must pass through. And when you finish, press enter to confirm the spline. If you press escape instead, you cancel the command and nothing is created. So have this in mind. Then, it's possible to adjust the position of the curve by moving the grips. The second method to create a spline is with controlling vertices. Now, unlike the spline fit, the curve doesn't pass through the points that we specify, as they are just vertices to control its position. Then this grip that looks like an eject button switches from fit to control vertices. So you can use this if later you change your mind. Another command available here is the construction line. It's this button. This creates an infinite line and it's used mostly for drafting purposes. One of the situations they can be useful is to draw an elevation of a floor plan, like the example I'm showing to you right now. The next command at the right is called ray, and it works in the same way as the construction lines. As well, we can use them as a reference to draw other objects. The difference: a ray is a semi-detached line. It has an origin and continues infinitely in the direction that we specify. Also, the polar tracking might be useful here. If we need to create rays separated equally with a specific angle, for example 15, select that option and then click where the pointer snaps. Other type of reference is simply a point. I can click in this command multiple points and you can place them in strategic positions. Then in this example, I'm going to add 2 points in 2 intersections of the track lines. At the right, we have 2 buttons called Divide and Measure. They are very similar. With Divide, we can create a certain number of spaced points along a line or another kind of object. Now I enter the number of segments, for example 5, and press Enter. The only thing here is that we can't just see these points if we delete the line or move it to another place. So in conclusion, I think this command can be useful if we need to place equally spaced points along a certain direction. So in this case, I can draw a line, then use divide, and erase the line at the end. With the command measure, instead of specifying the number of points, I set the length between each of them. As an example, let's type 20, and I divided the line in 5 sections. In the last chapter, we will talk about texts, and this time we will focus on some a bit more advanced tips. Let's check them out. Insert text height is not showing on the command bar. Not sure if this happened to you, but sometimes when we are creating a text object, let's say a single line text, for example, we realize that it prompts directly to set a rotation angle of the text without asking for the text height previously. This happens when our current text style has a specific height defined in its properties. So, in this situation, we are on the style floor plan labels, and the text style you can see here, it's defined as 500. So, let's cancel this first. I'm going to access the text style properties, and you can see the height here for floor plan labels is defined as 500. On the other hand, the standard style, let's click on it. Remember that it prompts to specify a text height on screen due to the fact that the value here is set as 0. So memorize this. Now let's go back to floor plan labels, and I'm going to change the height to 0. Apply the changes and close. Finally, on the workspace, after activating the command single line text, the first prompt is to specify the height. Even the default one is 500. I can press enter to use this one or change to a different one if I want. How to convert multi-line text to single line text and vice versa. Okay, I'm going to insert a multi-line text object. For the text style, I'm going to use standard, and if you look at the label there, you can see it's the current style. Type the alias T, press enter, and then click anywhere to start defining the window that I want to fit the text in. And now, as this style doesn't have a specific height already defined, I can change it here if I want. So let's set 150 for example. Okay, now let's place 3 lines of text. And as my point is just to explain to you how this works, I'm going to put text 1, text 2 and text 3. Finally, click anywhere to confirm the multi-line text. Now, imagine that later I decided to separate each line, so this is very easy. You just need to explode it, and from now on we have 3 single-line text objects here. Now the other way around. In this file I have this floor plan, and in each room I added a label as 2 single-line texts with different heights each. One is for the name of the room, and the text below indicates the area in square meters. So it's also possible to merge both on a M text, and there is a command for that. Its name is a bit complex, by the way. txt2mtxt. Yes, it's strange, but actually it's not hard to memorize, as it means text to M text. But don't worry, because once you type the first 2 letters, it shows up on the command list. Then you press enter, and notice that the texts became a bit closer, and the reason is to follow the spacing that is defined in a multi-line text between each lines. Okay, this is a multi-line text now, and if you double-click on it, you can access the text editor as usual for changing the settings if needed. Another thing, this tool still works even if the objects are displayed randomly around the screen. The only problem is when applying text to M text, they may not organize how we expect. So you have to do it manually. It's simple. Enclose text in object. Now look at the labels that we had on the floor plan, but to simplify the things, I copied them to an empty space here because I think it's easier to understand properly how this tool works. And to be even better, let's move also the areas, which are in a smaller size, a bit below. Now, let's switch to the Express Tools menu, and specifically at the text panel. These are basically some advanced operations regarding texts, and there is also this command, the txt2mtxt, that I was focusing earlier in this video. But okay, what we need now is this button Enclose to Object. I'm going to click on it, then I select all the objects, press enter, and then the first prompt is to insert an offset factor. And be aware that this is not a distance, it's just a factor that still has in consideration the size of the text. As a first attempt, I'm happy with this 1 value, so I press enter, and for the type of object, let's go for rectangle. Then we have here 2 options, constant and variable. And to understand better the difference, there is nothing like seeing the result. I click on variable, and now the object size differs according to the length and size of each text. So that's why the rectangle in bedroom 1 is wider than in bath. If I choose constant instead, then there is another box asking me what I want to maintain constant, if the width, the height or both. So this time I'm going to choose both, and now all the rectangles are exactly the same, even the ones around the areas whose text height is smaller. Basically, the system takes the largest rectangle and places it around the remaining objects. Now let's look what happens when we change the offset factor. If I set it to 5, the objects become bigger. The only problem is that it's maybe hard to guess the size that the object will have, unless you have a lot of practice. but you can try a few times until you find the value that you are looking for. Finally, there are two more types of objects that we can use: circles and slots. And the available settings are exactly the same as for the rectangles. One last thing, the text and object keep their independence in a way that, in this situation, the circle is not following the text if I change the text size. This was something, when I was exploring this command, I didn't understand what variable and constant meant. I thought when we changed the text height or the text itself, the object would adapt to the new size, but it didn't. Actually, variable and constant only works for a multiple text selection. Mirror text. In AutoCAD, by default, text objects are not mirrored when we use that command to make a symmetric copy of a specific drawing. As you will see in this situation, the texts are copied but without inverting the letters, just because I think most of the time we don't want that to happen. However, if in a hypothetical situation we need to display the text backwards, we only need to change the system variable mirror text. Press enter, and here we have two options. If I set 0, which is the mode by default, the text is not mirrored. So to enable this ability, I set 1, press enter, and now if I apply the command mirror to these objects at the right, look that now the texts are backwards. Insert a field in a text. This is a very interesting and useful advanced option available in AutoCAD. A field is basically a way to insert data that we expect to change during the cycle of a drawing. This is actually the definition that you can see on the Autodesk website, by the way. As an example, I provided to you this file where I have attached an image from a satellite view of a part of a town right in the center of Africa. Now, suppose the image is already scaled to have its real proportions in meters, the unit I specified for this project. Now I'm going to add a polyline to measure a specific area. Let's make it around these houses, and the accuracy here is not very important. I just want to show you how this works. Then let's add a text object, and I will type for it area of the terrain with the current value displayed here, and the main point is that the area updates automatically if I decide to change the size of that polyline. So I right-click with the mouse and go to Insert Field. In this window, from the category list, we can add date and time that could be useful for a layout sheet, among other options. Let's pick up Objects and then press this button to select a specific object, which in this case is this polyline. I click on it, and then at the right section there are several parameters that we can display. Let's choose Area, and at the section at the right, first we can see a preview of the result above, and this means it's going to be 3248 square meters. Then here we can choose the format. At this moment decimal is fine for me. Below it's the precision. And in additional format we have extra options like conversion factor, in case we need to display the result in a different unit than the one I set for the project, and an additional text. For example, I can add an indication of square meters as a suffix. Click on OK and close the window. Now, the area is displayed within the text. Also, notice that the values are showing highlighted, but don't worry in case you want to print, as on the paper this rectangle around the number will not appear. Finally, as I mentioned before, the great thing of using fields is that I can change the area of the polyline and the value updates automatically. Okay, sometimes we have to save the drawing and open it again to notice the change. But you can always use the command regen to update the value in this precise moment. So it was everything for today, but this time before leaving, I want to mention that I just started a page on Patreon for Getting Black. There you can support this channel to help me keep creating more content here. I would really appreciate that. Even of course, I'm already grateful that you find these videos valuable and that they are helping you to speed up your knowledge. Without your support, nothing of this would be possible. So, thank you very much for watching. See you next time.